All right, great. Thanks everyone for being here tonight. My name is Mike Boucher. I'm a Brighton resident and also a member of the IDEA board, and just really glad to have everyone here, including our great panel of presenters to talk about redlining, racist deeds, history, and also the future. So thanks for being here. There's a few we want to just start briefly with. Hopefully everyone will be able to see this. Let me slideshow from the beginning. So we would just want to start with again, if we're telling the truth about history, then we want to start with a land acknowledgement, and really just want to acknowledge that the Seneca people are the traditional custodians of this unceded land that we are on, and really to acknowledge their enduring presence with us. We want to pay respects to elders past and present of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and we'll just extend that respect to any other Indigenous people who are with us on this call today. Also being mindful that the First Nations and Indigenous peoples are not people of the past, they are people of the present. They remain with us in many, many ways. We also want to acknowledge that we make an acknowledgement as a first step in critically looking at these histories, and that acknowledgement in and of itself is not reparation. It's just acknowledgement. So acknowledgement without concrete steps that begin to address the implications of the histories that we have inherited are really not much more than lip service. And so really wanting to tonight take a look at what does it mean and what might it mean to begin to address all of the histories that we have inherited. And so just really want to say thank you to a few different people who have made tonight possible. Rebecca Cotter through Brighton Recreation really did a fantastic job making sure all of this, and so Brighton Rec made registrations available and just did a lot of legwork for us. Really want to thank Bridget Monroe from the town of Brighton, who is with us tonight. Also, we have quite a few Brighton elected officials who are on with us. I know everyone puts in long days, but I found that many town officials and people like Bridget put in very long days. And so just thankful for all those who are here with us from the town. I want to thank some of our panelists tonight. Shane Weigand. Shane has nearly become a household name in Rochester, given the tremendous work Shane has done with respect to both redlining and anti-racism curriculum that's going around, and Shane can say more. And also a relatively new group called CORD, Changing Our Racist Deeds. And so tonight there may be other CORD members who are on the call with us, but specifically Susan Murphy, Janita Anthony, and Ed Wiltsey will be helping us unpack some recent thinking and actions that they've been doing, and then also where things are unfolding. I really want to thank the IDEA board, which stands for Inclusion, Diversity, Equity, and Accessibility. Especially Manish Dixit, who has helped to pull tonight together as well. But the IDEA board has been formed for a few years and is working on a pretty comprehensive plan related to inclusion, diversity, and equity in Brighton. And so just grateful for their support tonight. Thanks to all of you for being here. Online events don't mean much if no one shows up. So thanks for being with us, and for the work people are doing that we may not be aware of, and for all the ways people are trying to bring about justice and equity in the community. And then also, there's a lot of folks in the world whose work gets invisibilized, that make contributions. Maybe someone's doing childcare tonight or elder care so that we could be here. Maybe somebody else made dinner so that we could jump on the call. Maybe we were able to get out of work early and someone covered for us. But there are just many ways that people support each other and make things possible. And so we just want to acknowledge the contributions that people might make that we forget to acknowledge sometimes. And then I would also invite any of our speakers tonight, if I've forgotten somebody, to please acknowledge them or remind us of someone's contribution. And then last, I don't often like to put a ton of text on here, but I'll read it as a framing for tonight of where we might go or what we might think about. A few years back in 2015, I had written a small piece, and I'm grateful to Shane for encouraging me to just kind of bring this forward. I had written something on redlining in Brighton that I had done some research on my own because it was a history I was aware of and just wanted to explore. And I just wrote a little piece, and it said, what would it mean in a community like Brighton to make amends for our history? I don't mean making amends for the history of the United States, although that would need to be a part of the conversation. I mean our community, the one where we live, where we play, the one we call home. We may not have created the historical circumstances, but those of us who are white in particular and living here certainly are beneficiaries of Brighton's racist history. Whatever the case, Ta-Nehisi Coates' words and analysis ring true when he said that, quote, America, or Brighton, was built on the preferential treatment of white people, 395 years of it. Vaguely endorsing a cuddly, feel-good diversity does very little to redress this. And so we wanted to have tonight's program to really begin to level set for us so that we have a common understanding of some of what happened, where we are, how we are, where we are. And we've asked Shane to kind of give us a brief overview of that for about a half an hour. Then some of the folks from CORD will take about a half an hour to speak a little of their experiences of some of what they've done, some of what they've explored, some of what they've started to uncover in the directions that they're beginning to move in. And then we would really love to begin to open it up to your own reflections, what you're thinking about, what tonight might stir for you at an affective or cognitive level, and then ultimately moving towards what are concrete actions that we might take and who would be responsible for those. Because I know I'm in many meetings where there's a lot of actions that are thought about, but not always assigned to people or to particular laws that we would need to change or to particular groups of people. So we may do some of that thinking together. So we have a chat function. If there's anything that comes up along the way, I'll try to be monitoring the chat. Please feel free to put in a question there. It can be a little, we're grateful to have so many people on the call. It can also be a little challenging during common conversation during the reflection time. And so we'll also try to keep a stack of who's looking to comment, who has what to say, and try to give everybody a chance to be heard or say something tonight. And also just, if you find yourself, if you're somebody who shares freely, and if you have multiple thoughts tonight and you really want to say all of them, we might invite you to hold back just one or two of them, or maybe put them in the chat. And if you're a person who might be a little more shy, who would take a little more encouragement, maybe you would try to move forward into a little braver space and say that thing that may be more difficult to say, or just something that you're thinking. And so that we have a balance of many different voices tonight. Any questions, comments, or concerns before we move on? Fantastic. If anything comes up, please put it in the chat, and I will turn it over to Shane, who I think will be doing some screen sharing as well. So,
thanks so much for having me, Mike. So I'm Shane Weigand. I teach 4th grade in Rush Henrietta. I'm the co-lead of the Anti-Racist Curriculum Project at the Pastone Foundation and serve on the boards of Connected Communities and City Roots Community Land Trust. And Mike is one of the people who got me interested in this work, learning about the racial covenants in Meadowbrook several years back, got me really excited about going to the clerk's office. And if Mike hadn't shared that with me, I don't think the Yale report on racial covenants that I'll talk about in a few minutes would have come out this summer. Some of the great work Mary Jo Lampier has done over at the library. I'm just incredibly grateful for that, and grateful for this chance to share a little bit about our history here in our region, in Monroe County, and particularly with a bit more of a focus on the town of Brighton. I grew up in Webster, but my best friend lived over on Evans Farm, and I can't tell you how much time I spent over on those streets riding bikes and getting in all kinds of good trouble. with my friend over there. So Brighton felt like a second home growing up, and it's great to be here today. I want to start with this quote from Brian Stevenson, who founded the museum down there in Montgomery, about racial justice and about lynching. And he talks about when we have conversations about injustice that's done, we have to start by committing to truth telling. We can't jump to reconciliation until we tell the truth. You don't have to go outside of our own institutions. We can begin with our own truth telling about systemic injustice and racism, both past and present. And I think it's so important, and something often that has been missing in our community, is to have the conversations about the reconciliation or about the solution in the context of the history and of what's happened, and making sure we're on some of those same pages. What I hope to do today is offer a quick look at some of this history. I'm going to go fast, which some of you will really appreciate it, and some of you will be very frustrated by. My apologies. I wish I could make you all happy. There is an online recording of a version of this talk that I'll share at the end, as well as all of these slides. My plan is to talk a little bit about our history, where we're at now, and what some possible solutions might look like when it comes to repairing the incredible damage that has been done, particularly to the African-American community in our area. Because the fact is, today, segregation very much marks our community. Our suburbs being predominantly white, our city predominantly Black and Hispanic, where wealth is hoarded in our suburbs, according to ACT Rochester's most recent 2020 report, and poverty concentrated in our inner city. The same thing goes for food insecurity today, asthma, uninsurance, high blood pressure, mental health not being good, or years of life expectancy, years of life lost, where people growing up in the inner city of Rochester are expected to live up to 9 or 10 years less than people in communities like Brighton, Pittsford, according to Common Ground Health. And so how do we have this community that's marked by so much disparity, so much inequality, particularly along racial lines, especially when we look at the Latino and Black communities in Rochester, where Hard Facts report in 2020 shows, every area from child poverty to home ownership to median household income. I'm not telling you things that you don't know. What I want to talk about today is how we got to this place, a place where our schools in New York State are the most segregated in the country, and the most segregated school district border in all 50 United States is the border between Rochester and Penfield. EdBuild in 2020 reported that Brighton has the number 6 most segregated school district border. Its border between Rochester and Brighton is number 6 in the country. West of Rondequoit is number 7 when it comes to both race and economics. And it's staggering that this is our hometown. And yet, part of the reason that this is where we're at is because we've chosen not to face these things. And one of the central messages I want to get at today is this quote from James Baldwin, who writes, "Not everything faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced." And I want to draw on that legacy of people of color who have always faced this racist history in our community. From Austin Stewart and Frederick Douglass fighting against slavery in upstate New York, to Sojourner Truth, to people like Howard Coles back in the 1930s, who called out redlining, a federal policy that restricted African Americans to living in just a few neighborhoods. More on that in a minute. Howard Coles also called out racism at Eastman Theater, where Black folks originally weren't allowed to attend, or the Lyndhurst Theater, where Black veterans coming back from World War II also couldn't attend. He called out how the suburbs were almost completely inaccessible to Black folks. And he even got his real estate license and started showing homes to Black people in white neighborhoods. After doing that, was very quickly forced out of his position by the leaders of the real estate industry here in Rochester. Howard Coles' legacy is rich and incredibly important. One of the things he also did was called out how banks, the local government, and real estate agents were steering Black folks into just 2 neighborhoods of Monroe County, the 7th and 3rd wards. Think that Hudson Joseph Clinton area of the city and that Clarissa Street Plymouth Exchange area. In those 2 neighborhoods, his newspaper documented that over 30% of apartment units didn't have running water, something that was baked in to how this community was developed. And Howard Coles called it out. He stood up against it. He fought back. I feel incredibly lucky to know his daughter, Joan Coles, who serves on our advisory board over at the Anti-Racist Curriculum Project. And he has a rich archive at the Rochester Museum and Science Center that I can't recommend enough going and spending some good hours in the dusty archives learning at his feet from the incredible work that he did both in the 30s all the way up until the 90s when it came to civil rights. He spoke out over and over, even if people didn't listen, as did his friend, Dr. Anthony Jordan, who connected that housing issue to health, calling out it in the Democrat and Chronicle back in the 40s. And what I'm trying to get at here is this isn't a new story. The story that ACT Rochester is telling in 2020 is not new. Dr. Jordan and Howard Coles were telling it in the 30s and 40s. Like for here, 50% higher death rates than whites from all causes for Black folks, or Black folks in Rochester dying at 2.5 times that of whites. And Jordan and his massive study directly linking it to poor housing. And part of the problem with the poor housing was that the real estate board in Rochester was governed by a national code of ethics that explicitly stated that a real estate agent would lose their license if they showed a home to a Black person in a white neighborhood, like Howard Coles did and lost his real estate license for trying to do. Now, in 1957, Alice Young, who helped found Monroe Community College, she was the first Black principal in Monroe County. She just won a New York State Medal for Freedom. I mean, she is who I want to be when I grow up. She's amazing. She's still with us. She's a Brightonian. She moved to Brighton a while back, but originally she lived in the 3rd Ward, and not a single real estate agent in town would let her look for a home in a suburb or in the 19th Ward neighborhood, which was all white at the time. Not a single bank would pre-approve the Youngs for a mortgage. Dr. Young was an administrator. Her husband had a great job. These are upper middle class folks, but the racism in Rochester was baked into the policy and they found no way forward. So Alice wasn't going to give up. So she was part of the NAACP. She had a friend named Mrs. Harper Sibley of the Western Union Telegraph fortune, and she bought her a house sight unseen on Millbank Street in the 19th Ward. Alice and her husband James moved in the middle of the night, and the next morning they found absolute racial terror from the Ku Klux Klan of Millbank Street, who'd signed this horrific letter that I will not read and put that in their mailbox, threatening them with death. They said they were going to burn their house down if they stayed. Alice is a friend of mine, someone who I've talked about this with a lot, who's taught me a lot about this history and the way she and her friends fought back. And she's asked that when I tell her story, I mention the Bush family, who was the one white family on their street that stood with the Youngs and helped them live there for the next 17 years before moving on to Brighton. Now, Dr. Young has asked that I mention that when people say, oh, it was just the times, that was just what was happening back then. White people didn't know any better. I want you to remember Alice Young. I want you to remember those articles in the paper from Howard Coles or from Anthony Jordan. This was part of our story in Rochester. It was out there and people chose to ignore it. And in this moment today, we have a choice. Do we ignore this history and do we ignore the racial disparity of this moment? Or do we try to understand it and fight back? Back then, people were actively and proudly fighting for racial disparity and white supremacy. Take a look at what is today East Rochester High School's football field. Over 8,000 fully robed Klansmen burning 3 50-foot high crosses in celebration of white supremacy. Over 20,000 of them marching down Main Street the next day. But take a look at 1964 in Brighton, crosses being burned in the front yards of people of color's homes. All the way up until the 80s, this was happening in Henrietta and in Gates, well documented by the Democrat and Chronicle. Now, meanwhile, we've got something called the National Housing Act of 1934 that codifies what's going on in the real estate industry, who's been putting racial covenants in deeds, who's been steering Black folks into certain neighborhoods. Their lobbyists helped push through this very important New Deal legislation that changed how our community looked. It changed the town of Brighton, my town of Webster, where I grew up, Pittsford. Our whole community in Rochester was shaped by this law. The National Housing Act of 1934, signed by FDR, it created the FHA's 30-year mortgages with that very little money down, that low fixed interest rate. And this turned into the GI Bill, which helped also millions of people have access to home ownership and build wealth for the first time. If it weren't for this law, I might not be where I am today. Both of my grandparents bought houses in suburbs because of this bill that allowed them to do it. But my grandparents are white like myself. And written right into this law, in its underwriting manual, it explicitly said that neighborhoods, it's necessary that they continue to be occupied by the same social and racial classes. And any change in social or racial occupancy would lead to any instability or a reduction in values, and therefore the racist idea justifying the racist policy. Going on to even say that these racial restrictions should be imposed on all land in an immediate location. So if you're a builder in Brighton in the 30s, 40s, and you want government money to help you buy your materials up front, you have to put racial covenants on every deed prohibiting the occupancy of properties except for by the race for which they are intended. It even went on to mandate that highways, high-speed traffic arteries, be built to separate inharmonious racial groups, which is an important piece in how we got our inner loop and separated that 3rd and 7th ward from the downtown. One of the ways this National Housing Act and the racist code, or what some have called almost an apartheid system, Douglas Massey out of Princeton has called it American apartheid, what happened here, is something called redlining, where the government essentially designated neighborhoods that would be Black neighborhoods and would not receive any investment from the federal government or really from local institutions. And it was based on race, ethnicity, and class. Green and blue areas meant 100% white, middle and upper middle class. So down here in the bottom right is Brighton. We're going to zoom in on that in a minute. Blue meant still desirable, yellow definitely declining, so predominantly almost entirely white, but maybe poor, or you had some more ethnic whites in the neighborhoods. And red meant hazardous, if there was even one Black person living in those neighborhoods. It could also include Jewish folks, at least until 1944. Polish and Eastern European communities sometimes fell under what was going on with hazardous. That all changed in 1944, but more on that in a minute. So here's how it happened. So these mortgages were insured for white people in the green and blue neighborhoods. Meanwhile, Black folks were steered into these red line neighborhoods. This is the actual government assessor's report from the Homeowners Loan Corporation of the Clarissa Street neighborhood, which after it was gentrified is now called Cornhill. It was 75% Black and 10% foreign, Italian, therefore red line, no federal investment, people of color steered there. Take a look at Pittsford's East Avenue Estates by Oak Hill. Racial covenant on every deed, 0% Black, quadruple the income, and no non-Caucasian ethnicities, which at the time meant Anglo-Saxon. And remember, eugenics is huge in the 1930s in our country. Compare that to my neighborhood, Beechwood, 2% Black at the time. Today it's over 70% Black, but it was redlined because it was 2% Black and 30% Italian. Compare it to Kodak's Meadowbrook neighborhood here in Brighton, almost 20 years after it began to be built, still 0% Black, and those racial covenants held true. But more on that. So if you're a white person and you were looking to move to the suburbs and you had a small amount of savings, you could go to the bank and get a federally subsidized loan to move into this neighborhood. Notice it was 0% Black, 0% foreign. On the report, they describe it as being carried out largely under the auspices of the Eastman crowd, as built with pleasing architecture, a carefully planned development. Take a look at Brighton Home Acres, 0% Black, 0% foreign. Here's the Clover Hills neighborhood in Brighton. Take a look at Council Rock Estates. Notice this one, executives with incomes up to $50,000, 0% Black. This is over in the East Avenue area of Brighton. You notice this pattern, and at this point, I think you're starting to get the point. Ellison Park, a neighborhood with racial covenants in every home, is that Brighton was 100% white at this time. And the government codified that and made sure it stayed that way for quite a few decades ahead of time. And by 1960, in Rochester, to show you how extensive and what the scale of redlining in this community was, or forced racial segregation by the government, the most integrated suburb of Monroe County was Henrietta, with just 11 individual people of color living there, led by Dr. Walter Cooper and a few friends from the NAACP, who didn't move to Henrietta because they wanted to. In fact, they really didn't. Dr. Cooper, who's a good friend and advisory board member at the Curriculum Project, has said he moved there because there was no other place to go. The whites were the least organized in Henrietta, and so they figured with their organization, they could slam their way into that neighborhood and still had to fight quite a bit of racial abuse. Meanwhile, towns like Brighton, we'll talk a bit about more in a minute. Some more scope and scale, though. Richard Rothstein, in his book, The Color of Law, describes how the FHA and the VA, or the government, insured half of all new mortgages nationwide during this period, up until 1968, under this whites-only, explicitly racially segregated policy, giving out over $119 billion in mortgage insurance to families like mine, and even helped subsidizing public housing for white veterans. Take a look at Alfred Gerdes and Elmer Milliman, two of our big leaders in the housing community in Rochester, building public housing for veterans in Brighton in 1947. Howard Coles, who you met a few slides earlier, he tried to help a number of Black veterans live in this apartment complex in Brighton, or the other one they built on Norton and Ferndale. And Gerdes and Milliman denied every Black applicant because of the color of their skin, even though they met every other qualification for living there. Rothstein goes on to talk about how over 35 million families like mine benefited from these FHA and VA Black loans. 98% of them were white, and that was the same in Monroe County. Let's talk a little bit about racially restrictive covenants, which, if you remember, what happened with redlining is racial covenants were codified and they were subsidized and enforced by the federal government, but Rochester started doing it well before the government said people in Rochester had to. In the summer, thanks to some amazing questions from my students in fourth grade wanting to know about these things, I had the chance to partner with students, my friends at City Roots Community Land Trust, and the Yale Law School's Environmental Protection Clinic to go down to the clerk's office and do a really deep dive into these racial covenants and thousands of deeds in Monroe County and who created them and what stories that we might uncover, which led to a big part of why we're here, what's happened in the Meadowbrook neighborhood. Real quickly though, a racially restrictive covenant is a covenant or clause in a deed to a home, sometimes to an entire neighborhood's plot of land, that explicitly says that no person of color or not of the Caucasian race can live in that home, and that neighbors can take these people to court and force them out of their homes if they try to move there. And these were enforced and put into place by not a small group of fringe folks on the outside who are, kind of ignorant racists in the background. This was the heads of Monroe County's government, businesses, legal associations. This was the most important people in Monroe County who created these policies, like County Manager Clarence Smith. And every single Monroe County legislature, including the ones representing Brighton, signed off on putting racial covenants explicitly saying in several neighborhoods in Irondequoit and other communities that no person of any race other than the Caucasian race shall use or occupy these buildings or lots unless they're a domestic servant. So county government putting this into their tax foreclosed properties all across Monroe County and signaling to real estate developers, you got to keep doing this too. Kodak got on board 10 years or so before this with the Meadowbrook neighborhood. Vice President Harry Haight, who helped found the Kodak Realty Corporation and ESL Bank, which was founded to finance the Meadowbrook neighborhood, explicitly wrote into most of the deeds that no lot or dwelling shall be sold to or occupied by a Black person. You can see signed right there by Kodak, which was, Kodak was the thing here in Rochester at this period of time, right? Or take a look at Council Rock Estates, Roselawn, Ellison Park Heights, all neighborhoods in Brighton that we know have racial covenants on a majority of their deeds. I expect that some folks here will know about their neighborhood. There's a few other neighborhoods that I've heard, but I haven't been down to the clerk's office to see in Brighton. But a significant percentage of homes in Brighton have these explicit racial covenants. Notice the Democrat and Chronicle's participation, actively advertising these racial restrictions for desirable social character, signaling this was something we want in our community. One thing that I stumbled across today that I found fascinating was that in the Maybrook neighborhood of Brighton, off of Winton there, they actually had this like racist Aunt Jemima thing to help sell the homes, where they brought Aunt Jemima in to try to like persuade white people to buy these homes. Just this was what was going on, right? In East Irondequoit, the Catholic Church, the head of the Catholic Church, Bishop Francis O'Hearn, put these racial covenants under churches. And remember, these churches were where these priests lived, in the rectories. So they're making sure that no Black bishop is going to be coming or priest. All throughout Northwest Irondequoit, over 2,000 of these advertised in the DNC. This was, again, all done in the open, and nothing was a secret. It was agreed to by the founder of Wegmans, Walter Wegman, who agreed to this racial covenant. He wasn't forced to accept it. And when he sold his home several years later, the covenant had expired, and he re-upped it and made sure that that house remained a whites-only property. Schools like throughout Gates, like Thomas Edison School, had these covenants. You'll see all throughout Pittsford, East Avenue Estates, the head of the Builders Association, Norman Huck, and Frank Drum at the Real Estate Board, putting these on hundreds of homes that they built across the county. Even the head of the Rochester Bar Association, writing these into hundreds of deeds across the county. Again, something done by Rochester's elite, consented to and supported by our press, by our media, and our towns, and something widely known and accepted by the white community, but not the black. People like Howard Coles and Judge Davis fought back. Judge Davis tried to move into the 19th Ward in 1958. In his oral history, he says, "We saw a house we liked in Elmdorf Ave, a block or so west of Genesee. There were probably 4 black families that lived anywhere west of Genesee at the time, and the owner refused to sell to us because we were black. There was a covenant in the deed that these houses, when built, were not to be sold to people of color or Italians." Quick note, in 1944, with the passage of the GI Bill, Jewish, Italian, and Eastern European people legally became white and could move into these homes or get FHA mortgages to move into suburbs like Brighton. And you see a big shift with those populations moving to the suburbs. But for black veterans of World War II, like Judge Davis, he was denied and could not have that access. So he decided to resort to what he called devious methods. Notice Nothnagel was the realtor who was refusing to sell him. That is his home and the year it was advertised and sold. He says, "I was active at the NAACP, and a white friend bought the house and transferred it to me. We had to go through those kinds of devious methods in order to find housing." And he made his way in. We tracked the sale of those deeds, and it's a fascinating part of our story. And I wish I could say his was the only one. He describes his situation as being pretty typical in getting decent and safe housing anywhere in Monroe County, even if you had the means. When you take a look at this map, you can see the racial covenants in those black spaces all across our community. Students at U of R and RIT are researching these now to build onto this map, like other cities have done in our country. And we estimate there's another 10 to 20,000 covenants still for us to find. And if you take a look at what we have confirmed over in Brighton, here are some of those neighborhoods that we've found so far. Now, to give you more scope and scale of how this redlining played out, black activists fought for change, and New York State decided to do a commission to help with their efforts instead of some real policy change. But while this commission wasn't super helpful at the time, it helps us understand the specifics of what happened. Find that in the 50s, 80% of all black people lived in just those 2 neighborhoods, the redlined 3rd and 7th wards. They were incredibly overcrowded, many not having bathrooms or more than one person living in a room. And it found that in 1958, not a single FHA or VA loan was given to any black person in any suburb, including Brighton, anywhere in Monroe County. But people like the Tullivers decided to fight back. The Tullivers decided to move into Verena Drive. And just before the final paperwork was signed, everything had been agreed to, final paperwork not signed, a number of his neighbors pooled their money and illegally bought the house out from under him, forcing the Tulliver family to join with the NAACP to sue, and eventually successfully sued, to live in that home on Verena Drive. The same thing happened to the Primo family in Irondequoit. It happened out in Gates. These petitions happened out in Pittsford when the Dents moved in. This was common throughout our community, not just Brighton. And when we think about all these policies, and I could talk for an hour or 2 hours more about some of these policies, it's really important to understand they directly connect back to today. Like, take a look at these maps that show life expectancy in relation to redline neighborhoods. You can see your life expectancy in our community is significantly lower, and it's by design. You can see our segregation across our community lining up with this map, or the same when it comes to what I showed you at the beginning about where wealth is hoarded and poverty is concentrated. The same goes for child poverty, home ownership rates, all the things that I know we already know, right? And so what would it mean for Brighton to make reparation, to be a part of rewriting the wrong that Brighton has been a part of, that has helped build Brighton? It may not be anyone in this room's specific fault. They might not have been the people right there putting on these covenants or having voted for some of these specific people, but it is still our community and it's our legacy to deal with. And we're complicit if we don't take that active action to institute the anti-racist policies in housing, policing, education, and so many other places that are going to be needed for us to create change. And what I want to do is talk just a little bit about what it might look like to do some of these things. I'm not the expert on change, I'm an expert on curriculum and on local history. But these are some of the ideas that activist friends and friends of color and folks in Brighton that I've talked to feel are important. And I just want to give you just a quick overview of what some ideas of what this could look like potentially might be. And again, I'll continue to go fast. And I want to borrow a little bit from my good friend Simeon Bannister's work. We've done a presentation together where he always talks a lot about this formula for failure in our community, where we are spending a ton of money, millions of dollars on police, fire, and teachers in our city. And almost all of those employees are living in our suburbs, in towns like Brighton. So our city is subsidizing our suburbs and this really unequal system, right? And so if you look at our GDP, what's coming in from the city compared to the suburbs, we are subsidizing our suburbs. And Simeon does a great job talking about this. I'll have a link to a video to thinking about some of this. But right now, we are a part of this system. It's extracting money from our city and bringing it into our suburbs and allowing this concentrated poverty, people living up to 9 years less, to continue to happen. And so talk a little bit more about this. Some of the problems have to do with our institutions, under-resourced interventions, the subsidizing of the quality of life in the suburbs. It's causing all of us to suffer though, right? When stories like these get on the news, when we're known as one of the worst places in the country here in Rochester for Black people to live, companies coming from out of town aren't going to want to come and to invest in a place like this. It's not a zero-sum game. I think it's really important for us to think about that all of us are going to benefit from anti-racism and from equity. And so to think about a different kind of solution, Simeon talks a lot about this idea that we need to see the opportunity. People of color in our community, they are not a problem to be solved. They're a problem that people like myself have been a part of creating and have allowed to create. We need to invest in these Black, Indigenous, people of color communities. We need to make sure that they have a massive reinvestment in these places to thrive. That could look like so many different ways, right? But another huge thing that has to be a part of this is that the solutions have to be with these people who are directly affected, especially people of color, have to be at the table and being authentically a part of those solutions, right? We have to believe that the people who live in these places have the solution and that we have to be a part of that as allies. And we have to make it community-driven and data-informed. And I think that has to be huge. So how do we have an inclusive recovery in our community? I think we've got to leverage this moment. The fact that 31 people are coming out tonight to talk about this, and I talked to a big crowd at U of R Simon School today, and over 3,000 people since July have come to some version of this talk that I've given, says a lot about what's going on. The thousands of people who have protested in our streets for racial justice. We're in this moment, and I think that we can use this moment to push forward something that is truly anti-racist and equity. That has to be federal, it has to be federal, but it also has to be local. And it has to be community-driven and policy-focused. So one of those things to look at in a town like Brighton is single-family zoning, which after the civil rights movement, it's around the late 60s, towns like Brighton, Fairport, Penfield, Pittsford did what suburbs nationally did. They responded to the civil rights movement. They realized they could no longer zone explicitly based on race anymore. The racial covenants were not going to keep their neighborhoods protected from Black folks. So the government never has made it illegal to discriminate based on class. And so towns like Brighton, Penfield, that's what they did. They're all white, all male zoning boards instituted very draconian exclusionary zoning methods, making it incredibly difficult to build any kind of apartments and making lot sizes significantly bigger to keep homes more expensive and to price people out. Almost 88% of Brighton is today reserved for single family homes. And this is some of the great work done by Stu Jordan over in the poli-sci department at the U of R. And you can see some of those folks who are part of that zoning process, fighting against apartments in Brighton. Whereas Black activists like Robert Rhodes in Pittsford, he fought back. He was one of those first people of color to own a home in Pittsford. And he called what was going on with these zoning policies in Brighton and Pittsford, he called it the new racial covenants. He talked about how what they were doing was going to hasten the day that we will be a divided community here in Monroe County on our way to self-destruction. And he fought about it, he named it, and what he said was going to happen has happened. Our communities continue to be incredibly segregated. So some of the proposals to think about are changing our land use policies to create affordable housing, removing some of those single-family zoning to do that in a smart and creative way that allows multifamily housing, mixed income. It's truly affordable, below 30 and 50% of the area median income. We need to affirmatively support the creation of community land trusts in our suburbs. They're community controlled, permanently affordable through deeds put into land that makes it for the next 100 years. The subsidy of affordable housing will continue in those places. We can push for regional planning approaches when it comes to all of these different things around zoning. Brighton can't do it alone. We need to partner with other towns who are starting to think about this, like in Pittsford and in Fairport, and find a way to do just zoning policy. And we can mandate the use of these covenants are disavowed. I think we can put in those anti-racist covenants like the Meadowbrook neighborhood's going to talk to us about in a minute is a really powerful statement of welcome, because often these neighborhoods and towns have not been welcoming and people know it. Another really interesting solution talked a lot about by Sarah Bonin at Desegregate Connecticut is something called accessory dwelling units, or ADUs, where zoning codes could be changed to allow, in-law houses or garages, attics, or parts of people's houses to be turned into rental units, which could allow for affordable housing to be built in and for more concentration of folks living in a place, more density, which is also great for the climate. One of the other solutions that I want to talk about, and I'm just about done here, is a community land trust. We have one in the city called City Roots. I'm on its board, and our focus has been that we want to fight gentrification, fight development without displacement. But in a lot of places, like in Burlington, Vermont, they've used it to actually protect against areas from becoming too affluent, to help create diversity and equity. And they've done some really interesting things. So here's how it works. The CLT is owned by the community, people who are members, who pay their dues, who have come to a certain number of meetings or volunteered. Again, the community decides what those rules for what a member is. They own that land, and they put clauses into all of the deeds explicitly saying these homes have to be sold at affordable rates. There's a number of different resale formulas that can be used. Brighton would have to figure out what specifically would make sense for them. And then that community elects a board, which manages and it tends to and stewards this land to stay permanently affordable. I can see a thing where reparations could look like in a town like Brighton, where you've got a number of houses, a certain percentage, slowly get bought up by a community land trust and are made to be permanently affordable and sold to first-time home buyers. And then those folks are supported. There's evidence that community land trusts, the 250 nationwide, that these land trusts have prevented evictions in significant ways. And these CLTs were it's really interesting. They were founded in Georgia out of the civil rights movement. People like Sherrod, founder, Charles Sherrod did some amazing work. This was a way to fight back against sharecropping. And now it's being used all across the country to create affordable housing and housing justice. And you can see that here. Another thing we have to think about is what's happening right now. We have to have that long-term lens, but we have to think about the almost 9,000 people a year in Monroe County, especially in Rochester, in those redline neighborhoods that are being evicted from their homes. I mean, 1 in 4 families is moving every year because of an eviction-related cause. And so people like my friends at the Rochester Citywide Tenant Union and the Housing Justice Alliance and City Roots Land Trust have banded together with eviction blockades, with protests, and calling for state-level changes to fight back against evictions and to make it just cause evictions and much harder for those kinds of things to happen. Matthew Desmond's book, Evicted, is a must-read to understand the way eviction is devastating communities, especially in redline neighborhoods across our country. And then we have to think about segregation. When you look at these statistics, Penfield being number 1, Brighton's border being number 6 in the country when it comes to school segregation. And you see some of these same problems with discipline. Black students in Brighton being disciplined 9 times as much as white students, or AP classes, almost 3 times greater chance if you're white that you're taking those classes, achievement, right? There's significant issues. And it has to do with a lot of the segregation that's gone on. And in Rochester, there's hundreds of pictures like this one of white mobs of parents demanding that schools stay segregated. And largely these parents, like right here in Rochester in 1970, they won and kept our schools some of the most segregated in the country. Meanwhile, schools like at Brighton High School, they had their annual blackface show. Brighton's high schools, theirs was called Licorice Lights. And Floyd Lord was one of those directors. We'd have 45 pupils in blackface performing these racist shows, only in 1947. And you take that kind of thing, you put it in the context of what's happening today with school segregation, and you think about those racial covenants, and we have to start thinking, what have we really done to repair the damage that was both cultural, that was both systematic, that was built into our housing and into our neighborhoods? And a big thing for this, to me, is education. One of my fourth graders, after learning about covenants in Brighton, said, maybe if kids learn about these covenants when they're older, they'll change segregation in Rochester. And so myself and my friends at the Anti-Racist Curriculum Project have been taking this research and using inquiry-based approaches, are working with 11 out of 21 school districts in Monroe County to help tell this story in a culturally responsive and anti-racist way, where kids are empowered to name the racism that they see in their communities, and empowered through the examples of the Howard Coles and Alice Youngs to be a part of creating those solutions, to realize that like them, they have power and they could come up together across our region, across our county, to fight back against this segregation and discrimination and disparity that continues to mark our community. And finally, we've got to talk about public safety and policing. From Rufus Fairwell to Denise Hawkins to Calvin Green, we've had significant issues all the way to Daniel Prude when it comes to systemic racism in policing, specifically in those red line neighborhoods. It's not a surprise that the big name issues that have happened with systemic racism in policing, the police killings and brutal beatings like this one after the result of Rufus Fairwell being beaten at the gas station he owned on Plymouth and Exchange, they've all almost been in these red line neighborhoods of Rochester. We have to reimagine what this could look like. One example is from Brighton's annual report, where of the way that we're using our police, 3% of calls resulted in offenses being cited, right? Like, it's interesting, like how we're using police as mental health providers and supports. And then in our suburbs, like the police and the encounters that people are having with the police are radically different than what's happening in our red line neighborhoods in the city. And we have to reimagine how those kinds of things happen. And finally, I think this idea of direct cash reparation funds, housing funds, have to be a part of the solution. Darity and Mullen's amazing work from Here to Equality lays out an amazing plan for what it could look like from the federal level for reparation to happen. But towns like in Evanston, Illinois have been doing their own form of reparations. And there's problems with this, but it's worth considering. Like in Evanston, if you're a Black family, they're going to give you up to $25,000 to help with your down payment to move into their neighborhood as a specific form of reparation. Some say it's not enough, some say it's crazy. But again, it's one of these ideas where towns are trying. We're not going to get it right on the first try. Maybe this is going to be a good idea, but it's the kind of thing that a town like Brighton could also be a part of doing. And so I know I've talked a lot. I've shared a lot of this history. I've shared some of the possible solutions for us to wrestle with and to think about today. And I want to close with this quote, that not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. And I hope you've been able to join me in facing it. And I hope that the message I'm leaving you with is not a message of despair or a message of this is just overwhelming. How can we solve this problem? Those solutions look great, but how do we get that kind of political will? How can we solve this? It's too much, or I'm learning about this for the first time. Well, an amazing book written by Heather McGee called The Sum of Us recently was published, and it talks a lot about this and the ways that all of us benefit from equity, much like Simeon talks about over at the Community Foundation. Heather writes in the book, I'm a fundamentally hopeful person because I know that the decisions that made the world as it is, and Brighton as it is, Rochester as it is, that it was decisions that made the world as it is, and that better decisions can change it. Nothing about our decision is inevitable or immutable, but we can't solve this problem with a consciousness that we created it with. And I hope that those words will help guide our conversation. And I'm so excited to hear from the neighbors in Cord and Meadowbrook about one of the ways that they've started to tell the truth about this history and are starting to take action to repair the damage that's been done. And I'll turn it over to Susan and Ed and Janita, and I'm not sure if there was someone else. Or back to you, Mike.
Yeah, I'm wondering, thank you so much, Shane. Seriously, deep appreciation too for offering so much in a short period of time. And thanks for the link. I just want us to pause before we move on to just take in. Just sit for about 1 minute and get not just intellectually, but affectively. And if there's something you're in touch with, just put that in the chat. Let us know what you feel, what's in your body after hearing that. This may not be the first time you've heard it, but what's arising for you? So if there's something that you'd like to put in the chat, that would be helpful. Just to be mindful that we're not talking just about ideas tonight. These are actual lives, people's lives that were deeply impacted, particularly Black lives. And it happened here in Brighton, happened in Irondequoit, happened in Henrietta, happened in Gates, happened in Pittsford, happened in Rochester, happened all across our country. But this is where we live, for those who are from Brighton. And this is the history we inherited. And Shane, there was a question in the chat too about the curriculum that maybe you could respond to later after we hear from the CORD folks. I'd appreciate that. So again, as if more is coming up for you, please keep putting that in the chat. Really grateful to have members of CORD with us tonight, who are going to offer some reflections on what they've been doing, what they discovered, where they are, and also some invitations to the wider Brighton community that they've been thinking about in terms of future action. So thankful to have Susan, Ed, and Janita with us tonight. And I don't know what order people are speaking in, so I'll just turn it over, I think, to Susan, who's doing the intro.
Yep. Thank you, Mike. And thank you to the IDEA board in the town of Brighton. We really appreciate this forum to share the court experience with our neighbors in Brighton and across Monroe County. And if any point you have questions along the way, you can put them in the chat, but you can also email meadowbrookcord@gmail.com, and we'll get that and we'll respond to you. I'm here with my neighbors and friends, Janita Anthony and Ed Wiltsey. They're also CORD members. We are a group of about 10 to 15 active members, and several are on the call tonight. And thank you for joining. I just want to give a brief introduction about CORD. You know, as Shane had mentioned last summer, the City Roots Community Land Trust and Yale put out the Confronting Racial Covenants report. Here in Meadowbrook, we have an active Facebook page, and one of our neighbors, Ed, actually posted on our Facebook page and asked what it would take to undo this legacy. And you know, the Facebook conversation went ahead, and out of that, CORD was born. So CORD stands for Confronting Our Racist Deeds. And we like that deed in this instance has a double meaning, both as a legal document showing home ownership, but also an intentional act, as in good deeds and bad deeds. And we have a vision in CORE to support a neighborhood that has made the effort to understand the impact of redlining and deed restrictions and are willing to take restorative steps to address the injustice that followed. CORE is made up of a group of Meadowbrook neighbors willing to use their time and talent to educate themselves and to take action. And after a few, the Facebook conversation went, and then we used Zoom in this COVID time to have a few conversations. And out of that, we quickly put together some subcommittees. We had the Revoking Covenant 12, our racist deed restriction. Janita's going to talk more about that. But that was really only our first step. We also have an education committee, a communications committee, and the communications committee is actually really central and important to everything that we do. We have just some wonderful professionals in the neighborhood that have consistently helped get the message out and to coordinate our efforts. We have fundraising. We had to raise funds to cover the registration costs with changing our deeds. And also we did some fundraising to support the anti-racist curriculum project at Pathstone that Shane is involved with. We have hosted a few events, including an event with Shane before, and we have some upcoming events. And then we have a real estate and housing subcommittee, and Ed will talk about that later. So our first step was revoking the deed restriction. It's a symbolic one, but it was really an essential first step. And I think it was very essential to do it the way we did, neighbor talking to neighbor, raising awareness, laying the groundwork for future restorative concrete steps to establish that goodwill or that political will going forward. And with that, I would like to introduce Janita, who's going to actually talk about the Revoking Our Covenant 12 and that project. So Janita.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Janita Anthony. I am a member of the Meadowbrook Core Committee. I'm also a resident and parent in Meadowbrook, Brighton. I'm fairly new to Brighton. Although it's been 4 years, I am not from the Rochester area. So I'm, coming in sort of as this clean slate into my new community. And I'm super happy to talk about the infrastructure that we built in order to make this happen. So I'm just gonna talk about, what happened. And, so it was very difficult. This Facebook conversation happened, and some people got together and said, hey, do you know this person, this person? We set up this Zoom. And from there, the Zoom, we really came together and said, you know what? We need to figure out our goal. Like, what is our immediate goal? Do we want to do this anti-racist work, and how? And what is it going to look like? So we immediately decided that, we would break apart and go into subcommittees where we would, these subcommittees would work on all of the particular parts of, all of the different parts of putting together this longstanding mission. So we knew we had to, number one, revoke these racist deeds. And so we put together 4 signature events along with notaries, along with our legal department. And as a unit, we worked together to make this happen. I'm a little nervous. I don't know why. I'm never nervous, but so I thought I might. So anyway, we revoked and amended our racial discriminatory covenants. And then really our focus is on, after that, making the second step of focusing on the harms that were caused by these redlining restrictions. And so what we did, we knew that during this entire process, we wanted to go ahead and make it a transparent and accessible. And so we put together our documents, and we said, you know what, we're going to put this directly right onto our neighborhood association page, and we're going to put an outline and a how-to and an FAQ so that people can learn how to do this themselves. And so I just want to do a favor. I'm going to share with you our Meadowbrook Core. It's like a general about us page. And then there's also an FAQ link that I'll give you. So all of the general questions you might have about how we did the process. And then lastly, the last link will be about a document about the how-to document. And this how-to document really outlines literally everything we did. And, you know, from there, if you have any questions, you can go to the email. I'm just going to put this very quickly in chat right here. Okay, there we go. Thanks. I'm doing great. Thanks, Katrina. Yeah, this report came out and it was just like, okay, everybody's talking about Meadowbrook, right? What are we going to do? We can't sit around and talk about this racist work if we don't right now, right here, figure out how to revoke and amend these covenants. So, you know, we were very lucky that we really had a great division of labor. We had people who could work on legal. We had really organized people who could work on signature drive, which was the action that we decided to take. And I'll explain a little bit about that after. We also had the fundraising portion where we decided that, you know what, we're going to go directly to the people who were a part of creating this community, and we're going to ask them for money. And we're going to say, you know what can you do to help us restore this wrong? So again, we organized this like dedicated group. It was like 6 or 8 of us who we decided we're going to meet weekly. We're going to reach out to our neighbors. So we sort of created this like interest gathering form. We had that initial Zoom. And then the most important part of this work is really locating your restrictive covenant and locating also the revocation of it. So we knew that we had to revoke it, but how do you do it? So we looked directly into our abstracts and our titles, which we were very lucky that one of the members or 2 of the members, a couple of them, had an actual copy of this covenant and also the revocation clause. So in our instance, our clause, our deed says, no home shall be occupied or sold to by a colored person. And then a few levels down, it says, but you can revoke it by getting 75% of your community to sign on to this revocation. So, okay, marching order. So we decided, okay, we want to make a deadline. We're going to give ourselves a 2-month deadline. We're going to utilize all of our subcommittees, and we're going to reach out to neighbors, and we're going to carry this out. So we did about 4 signature drives, and we were able to get in a 2-month period and these 4 events, we got a little bit over 75% of all of the property owners to sign off on these on this amendment. And what was really important to understand is that you can't just revoke an amendment. You can't just revoke a covenant. You have to you can't just remove a covenant. You have to revoke and amend it because there's a chain of title. Like you can't just take a part of someone's property deed and just remove it out there because you need to have that information. So we knew that we had to revoke it and amend it. So luckily during these 4 events, we were able to have over 75% of the people revoke it. And during this whole process, it was super important, like Susan said, communication. We had a very strong communication team that had great wording, messaging, updates, timely communication. If we weren't able to communicate effectively to our neighbors, they would not have showed up. And just to say, our first event, we had I think we expected 30, I think we had about 80 people come to sign. And we knew that at that point, okay, we're doing the will of the people. And we were excited that, okay, we can maybe actually get this done. Because at the end of the day, we were talking about this, but we really didn't know if we were going to achieve it. And so we did achieve it again within the frame of time that we said. And then we said, once we get this done, we know that our next piece of work, what we want to do is take actual steps to inform the community about this. So we created, in our education committee, they were the people who were going to take the legwork from us on the second stage to do the actual concrete steps and educate our neighbors, our children about what happened in their own community. And so Susan will talk a little bit about that when I'm done, but that education committee component was super important because, as this happened and after we revoked this covenant, there was a lot of pushback saying that, why are you doing this act that really is unenforceable? But we just wanted everyone to know this was a part of this long-standing arc that we wanted to do in our community. So Now, our next project, we're super excited to follow up on the work by Shane Weigand and other members in the Brighton community. And we're going to complete the mapping project of all of the racial covenants in Brighton. And we're going to look to work with, those who are already doing the work, as well as our town. We were lucky enough, I'm just going to make sure I don't get the name wrong, but we had our town assessor. She has already helped us get together all the Brighton neighborhoods, and we're going to put this mapping project to potentially have a permanent exhibition so that people can really, when they come into Brighton, they know that we are facing our past and we are ready to move forward. We are looking for volunteers, guys. So if anybody is interested in this project, feel free to email us at the Meadowbrook board. But in it, we're going to identify the neighborhoods, and so that moving forward, we can really have the goal of removing all of these covenants and all of the discriminatory covenants from Brighton. And that's ultimately our goal. So now Susan Murphy, she can take it away. She can talk about the education portion of our Meadowbrook Accord.
Unmuted. Okay. Thank you, Janita. So, so the education committee, we pretty had our goals were twofold. One was to educate ourselves. And so we did that work and put together the page on our history on the website meadowbrookbrighton.org. And if you follow the links, I think Janita has put up there, we have just wonderful information on the history of redlining. Oh, just a second, lost my notes. Okay, the history of, yeah, Janita's putting them up there. The history of redlining in and deed restrictions in Meadowbrook and the legacy. And we also hope that, so we're doing that through our website, through these events. We hope to have kind of post-COVID salons where we can actually gather in each other's homes and discuss these issues and see how we can move forward. And then the other way, the Education Committee, of course, reached out to Brighton, the Brighton Central School District. Now, understandably, in the time of COVID, the district has been super busy and focused on how to educate our students. But for more information on initiatives that the district is doing, they've just put a new tab up on the BCSD homepage titled Diversity and Equity. And you'll find a link there. It gives an overview of the work being done as well as Brighton's goals. So, we did reach out to BCSD. As I say, they had other things, an awful lot going on, but we were able to connect with a wonderful teacher, Christine Coyle, who is an extended studies teacher in the 7th grade. And we thought that extended studies would be a nice fit because they have a lot of wiggle room, but they have a lot of freedom to put together their own curriculums for the extended studies students. And so we met with Christine and she was so receptive, and she put together a 7th grade 5-week curriculum. And it started with the history of the Great Migration. Janita they videoed an interview with Janita, and Janita talked about her family's experience migrating north from Lorman, Mississippi. And then Christine used like a interactive educational platform to explore issues around poverty. And then she incorporated documents that Shane has made available through the Pathstone Foundation Anti-Racist Curriculum Project on the history of redlining. And they used that dot map that Shane showed earlier, showing segregation by race in Monroe County, and on local efforts to both put it into place and to confront and resist racist housing restrictions. And then CORD, we produced a little 3-part video using a narrated slide deck. And it started out with showing this, slides of this quintessential neighborhood with children's parades and ice cream socials, and then moved on to the local Meadowbrook history, including the original 1920s documents advertising our desirable neighborhood, which was protected by careful restrictions, and also, showing the language from the actual deeds that I think Ed is showing there. And then in 2020, 2001, she also included a pamphlet that the neighborhood put together celebrating our 20th anniversary as a commemorative booklet. But it was a booklet that celebrated, rightfully, Meadowbrook, but also failed to acknowledge our foundation based on white supremacist beliefs. And then, you know, this little video went, and we went through the court initiative and the actual drive that Janita just described. And then it ended with us asking students to reflect and brainstorm on next steps. And then Christine had each student write a reflection on the curriculum. And I'm just going to read to you just a couple of quotes from those reflections which Christine then shared with us. So for one, these are 7th graders. Quote, "Before this, I thought you could just buy a house if you had money for it. I was unaware that back then you had to be a white to get nicer houses. Now I wonder if that still goes on." Another one, "You can't overcome a situation if the people who are meant to help don't understand why it is a problem." And next, "Now I wonder if other things are not as they seem." And finally, the unit, quote, "made me wonder how much racism is normalized in the system, but now I wonder how we can try to fix it." And I just talked to Ms. Coyle a couple weeks ago, and she said that some of her students are now looking to form a club around this unit. And we're hoping that we can find ways to include them on the mapping project. So, so that's where the education is to date. We look forward to continuing our conversation with the school district and seeing how we can collaborate and advocate and support their work. So having said that, can I introduce Ed Wiltsey, who really did get the conversation started, and he'll talk about some of our next steps. Thanks.
Thanks, Susan. And it is my intent to be extremely brief because we've had lots of talking at and not enough talking with. So I'll just very quickly say that the second wave of sort of concrete steps, along with seeking to educate ourselves and educate our community, which we regard as concrete steps and not merely symbolic acts in the way that the change of the deed restriction might be understood as a purely symbolic act, is to engage with questions about housing policy in Brighton and how to create a more welcoming and inclusive community, a more diverse community. I'll just share very quickly one more time my screen to talk about some of the initiatives that the housing group, led by some of the folks who are on the Zoom right now, took up at our first meeting. We talked explicitly about some of the stuff that Shane has prompted us to do, like think about how to build more extensive housing in Brighton. If we have more of it, then we can be more inclusive with it. This includes ADUs, as Shane suggested, and thinking about how to incentivize the creation of ADUs that don't lead to $2,000 a month apartments in somebody's backyard, because that doesn't do anything to accomplish the goal of diversification by class or race. How to otherwise incentivize zoning within the town that that makes sure that we have mixed income housing and not simply market rate housing, as is currently the case in Brighton. How to confront the question, and I was very grateful to Gwen Faulkner, who's on the call right now, for raising this issue that we're about to hit the May 1st cliff of eviction protection in New York State. And what happens after that? Are there a whole bunch of folks in apartment stock housing in Brighton who are facing eviction right now? I don't know the answer to that question, or even how to find out the answer to that question, but it's certainly one that we should engage. It's not only Take Back the Land and other groups in the city, you know, who need to be thinking about this, but we need to be thinking about it right here in Brighton. The question of Section 8 housing and whether, as we know has happened around the country, here in Brighton, landlords have actively resisted engaging with Section 8 supported tenants. And how do we make sure that folks who are seeking to live here, whether in apartments or in single family homes, or in other kinds of structures yet to be built, are protected within their civil rights in their ability to use Section 8 and other kinds of public support to live in our community. Whether the real estate industry is in Brighton, as it has around the nation, guilty of practicing discrimination in steering families toward particular kinds of housing. And finally, whether public transportation is well-serving or not well-serving our community in terms of our ability to move around. And this, of course, is both a green as well as a justice issue in terms of how we live together better. So I'll stop there, hand it back to Mike to take us to the next stage of the conversation.
Great, thanks so much, Cord. I've been surfacely connected and learning a heck of a lot more tonight. Just really grateful for all of you, and not just what you're doing in terms of the specific deeds and racial covenants and the awareness, but the depth and extent of what you all are doing and the community building that you're doing. I mean, this is really an amazing. And as I put in the chat, if you don't live in Meadowbrook and your neighborhood association is not doing anything around this or is trying to do something around this, please link up with Cord on this. We're trying to get, now as you see, there's what a small percentage of Brighton on this webinar tonight. I think there's 37,000 people in Brighton or something like that. There's just a fraction of us. And so we would like this conversation to extend, because again, once you start pulling on the racial covenants, you start pulling on redlining, you start pulling on, and almost every other justice issue starts to show itself somehow. And so there are foundational conversations that we can be having, and just really grateful. This is the point in the evening where we really want to open it up to you in terms of some of your reflections. You've been taking much in. You may be very involved in your own ways and in different circles. You may be encountering some of this for the first time tonight. You may have other reflections, histories, and experiences that you want to share. And so if you would like to speak, it's a little hard with two screens because we can't see everybody, but we'd love to hear from as many of you as possible, either through the chat or if you'd like to say something. So please just take yourself off of mute, and that'll let us know that you'd like to speak. And then if there's a specific question you have, maybe for Cord, maybe for Shane, maybe for one of the public officials who's on, you know, we'll if you don't get to the question too quickly, we'll try to help you get to your question so that we can hear from as many folks as possible.
I'll answer the question from earlier in the chat real quick. Someone asked if Brighton is using our 4th grade curriculum at the Pastone Foundation's Anti-Racist Curriculum Project. Currently, we haven't partnered with Brighton, but would love to work with BCSD anytime, and all of our resources are available. I know they're using the awesome work in high school that's being done by Q's and the superintendents, and that's been in collaboration with our work and our sources, so we're really excited about that. But at that elementary level, we have amazing 4th grade curriculum, 5-day unit on redlining specific to Brighton that we would love to partner with. And we also offer free 3-hour professional developments that we've given to over 500 teachers in 11 out of 21 school districts. And so we're really excited for that possibility. And so if you have friends at the school district and folks that you'd like to connect them with, we had a great meeting earlier in the year. We've come a long way since then. We'd love to share more with them about what partnership might look like and how we might add value to the good work that's going on already in those schools. So I hope that helps answer your question. But our hope is to work with everyone and to share and to help them create the best version of the curriculum for their schools and for their kids.
I would just encourage everyone before you leave tonight too, if you have the capacity to save the chat, because there's a ton of stuff being put into the chat. And at the end of the night, I'll put my email in just in case you aren't able to save the chat somehow. And so if you want to email me to get the chat, I will do that. So just keep putting information, resources, and other things in the chat through the night. Thanks.
Hi, this is John Stewart. I live in Roselawn. And I'd just like to give a quick update on what some of us have done and what some research we've done here. And I guess I want to thank Shane for all the presentations I've watched. That was my motivation to get going. And also to Mike for the, I guess I'll call it a research paper you provided to me about a month or two ago. that really prompted me to get going. And what I did is I sent an email out to one of our neighborhood association email lists, and I heard back from about a half a dozen people, one of which is on the call tonight. And we started looking at, basically we started out looking at our abstract, and a couple people had a complete abstract. And the interesting thing we learned is that we had a restriction that basically stated we didn't want any undesirable races here. It wasn't much more specific than that. But the interesting thing, and I guess almost as shocking as that was, there was a statement that that expires after 15 years. So ironically, we didn't find a revocation clause, but we found a statement at the end that said these restrictions actually expire after 15 years. So, and if you look at our earliest deed, it was 1919. So I guess we could safely say that they probably expired somewhere before World War II. So we're kind of at the point now where, okay, what do we do next? Other than, attend this presentation and learn what's going on. So, the good news is we don't have to do all the work that Meadowbrook did. So now we're at the, okay, what goes next? And I'll be happy, Janita, to forward all the information I gathered. And the other thing I guess I'll just close with is we did have 2 Zoom meetings for, I guess, about 3 or 4 people, where we went through a very brief history of Roselawn, and we talked about redlining and fair housing and the Supreme Court decisions, a lot of the stuff that the meat of some of the presentations that Shane does, but more in the context of Roselawn. And it was really, it was very productive, and it was really enlightening, and people were able, in a small group, people were really able to, say what was on their mind. But we're kind of at the holding pattern right now. And that's really all I have.
Can I respond to that? Can I respond to that, John?
Sure.
This is Susan. So, I'm just thinking out loud here, none of these deed restrictions held any power since the late 1950s.
Right.
Right. So does it really matter, because it is a symbolic act? It was a symbolic act for Meadowbrook as well. Does it really matter whether or not they expired? Is there something, have you just looked at revoking the covenant? Is there any other part of your deeds that allow for change of any other part of your deeds, like whether or not?
I think, and I had several lawyers look at the restrictions and expiration, and the consensus is everything expired, including size of lots. And
really?
So personally, they're expired, so they're not enforceable. And I guess so my personal motivation would be, I'm not motivated myself to spend the time and energy to modify the deed. I volunteer 4, 5, and 6 days a week at our community bikes, which serves a part of the population in Rochester that's totally underserved.
Sure.
So
I guess what I would say is just do what you're doing, which is just to have that conversation with your neighbors, right? Because so much of it is about just letting neighbors in Roselawn, like in Meadowbrook, even know about the existence of this language on their deeds. It's still on their deeds.
Yeah.
Right. And just that awareness is very important.
Well, and I know this is preaching to the choir, but
yeah.
Not everybody understands the difference between a deed and an abstract, and not every abstract is written the same. One of my neighbors has an abstract that basically at the end says there's things in this abstract that are not legal per the Fair Housing Act of 1968. Right. So, but not everybody's abstract has that, and I think that's an education thing we can do, because I understand there was a debate in the Brighton Facebook group about whether Roselawn actually had restrictive covenants. And it was probably based on the fact that somebody didn't have them spelled out in their abstract. Because I've seen abstracts that aren't as detailed as others. You know, that's just when they were done, who did them, or so having the individual conversations, I think, is good and it's rewarding. But actually, the legal work is, you know.
And John, maybe you can work with the if you don't mind connecting offline with some of the folks from Meadowbrook to, you know, we could think about what might happen in Roselawn for furthering steps. I'm wondering if there's anyone on the call who could answer Grace's question. Full disclosure, Grace is my niece in Nibbling, a Brighton High grad in college and on this call tonight. So big props, someone under 23 even who's on the call tonight. So thank you. But can anyone in 30 seconds or less tell the difference between an abstract and a deed?
Mike, I can give it a shot.
Please.
Basically, the deed is the title document under which you own your property. The abstract is the compilation of every other deed, mortgage, anything that would affect the ownership interest in the property, containing a history going all the way back to a specified time. And that would include something like restrictive covenants like we're talking about tonight.
Mic drop.
Thank you very much. That's
Thank you,
helpful.
Jason.
One thing I want to add about your statements, John, and I'm glad you've been digging into it, is oftentimes these wouldn't be, like Walter Wegman made sure that once his expired, that it was re-put back in. But usually just having it there was all you really needed. That's what a lot of the researchers, University of Minnesota, have found with their mapping inequality project. That's what Jordy Yeager, they found down in Charlottesville, and what Connor Dwyer Reynolds, who is our researcher from Yale Law School, also, he and his students really found when they did their full national summary, is that it's not so much about when it expired, it's that it's there and that people still would enforce them. So if you remember that Judge Reuben Davis story, that was 1958. Technically, they should no longer have been legally enforceable. Like if she couldn't legally take him to court anymore in 1958, but it was enough that Nothnagel effectively used it to keep him from moving into that home because he was Black, right? So like just in that way, and some of the public ignorance, they were utilized quite frequently across our community to say, oh, sorry, this isn't the deed, and to push people away. Or people would see that and they would react really strongly, being like, oh, I don't want to be the first Black person in this neighborhood and know that this is on the deed. It was a really great deterrent for white folks wishing to keep their neighborhoods that way. Some of you may have seen the new show, it's called Them on Amazon Prime. And in the first episode, there's a scene where the covenant is on their house in Compton, LA, an all-white neighborhood. And it has some pretty startling language, similar to some of the language in Brighton. And the real estate agent's like, oh no, that's like expired. And they're like, I don't want to live in a house that has that on this deed. Like, that part of it, I think, is still there. And that's why, for me, what you guys are talking about seems important. Janita, did you have something to add?
Yeah, just to your point, and that's part of the reason that we did what we did, is because we knew that we wanted people to come to our neighborhood, and when they go to buy, their abstract will have these new amendments on it saying that we are a community that welcomes everybody. And so that's why it was important for us to complete this work and get it done. And so it wasn't just, you know, they can look and see the racist language, but they can also look and see that, you know what, people made an actual effort in order to say, this is a community that we want and strive to be. So it was really about aspirational. It was very aspirational for us.
You know, on one of the presentations, I think, was there some discussion about modifying things at I'll call it a community level, whether it's a town or a county or a state level. You know, I've read something or heard things, and I'm wondering, rather than each, you know, is there something we could do to approach it at a larger path than just one neighborhood at a time in Brighton?
Yeah, there's legislation that's been proposed for a long time at the state level, but the Builders Associations and Real Estate Board, as well as the Bar Association in New York State, has really kind of pushed back against that legislation. kind of saying it's old news and it's going to add a small but extra expense that's going to hurt their business. So there has been some push. It's been interesting. I've been talking to a lot of friends at our Monroe County Bar Association about this, and they're having a healthy debate right now. A similar presentation was given to them about their role in this work. They're a huge part of enforcing these covenants and redlining at the Bar Association here. And they're having some big debate, at least some of them, about this idea of, do we have it like a sweeping change? And then a lot of people might not know about it, right? Or do we make it so we make it easier for neighborhoods to do it? It was way too hard for what you guys had to do, in my opinion, but in a way where everyone in the neighborhood is educated and there is like a physical thing of that happening. And for us, we want to map that in our curriculum, every neighborhood that's changed it, that a kid can be going to Council Rock Elementary School, which is in a whites only restrictive covenant neighborhood. And first of all, know their school likely has a covenant under it, and that school has revoked it. To me, that feels important. And it seems a little different if it's just state level. Like, I'm not sure what that should look like. So there's some debate that, I don't know. I can't decide. I feel both ways about it.
There's a few things in the chat that I want to make sure we potentially get to, and I know a lot of people are on the call. You've been taking it a lot in, and so we want to hear from as many people as possible. We'd also like to get to some action steps. There was an ask about the idea board and what idea board might be doing with respect to housing, if I'm right, Mark. And then also, I think Ed asked, particularly to Bill or anyone else from the town council, about what's happening with respect to housing justice. I would invite responses to that, but limited to like a minute. This is, I would actually invite the town to host an evening on housing justice, about what you are doing with respect to housing justice, so that we don't take all the time tonight, but that you lay out the comprehensive plan for us all, so that we can weigh in on that and be part of it. So, but I don't know if anyone from the idea board.
Do you want to start in on the idea board? And then I'll talk a little bit about the town, and my colleagues on the board can also chime in. But let's since you mentioned idea first, let's have Robin talk about that.
Certainly. And Bill has asked me to speak because I am the liaison from the town board to the Inclusion, Diversity, and Equity Advisory Board. And this board was formed 2 years ago. And they are currently working on Inclusion, Diversity, and Equity Action Plan. And the board kind of focuses on 3 task force areas in which to improve inclusion, diversity, and equity within our community. Task Force 1 is focused on infrastructure and housing, also public safety. Task Force 2 is focused on engagement and partnership, dialogue and education, of which this conversation is part of that task force, inclusion, representation, and celebration. And Task Force 3 is focused on economics, policies, and practices. So the goal of these task forces is to garner information from the community, feedback from the community, which has begun in the form of our World Cafes. So over the course of the last 18 months, the Idea Board has held a number of community conversations that garnered feedback from the community in these 3 task force areas. And they've now compiled all of those suggestions, and we're working on actually crafting the plan. We've relied in large part, because we don't have anything locally or even statewide to serve as an example, on a inclusion, diversity, and equity action plan that was implemented by Beaverton, Oregon. And we've actually had members of their community come and talk about their implementation of the plan. And we are now working on the actual writing of the plan. We intend to present that to the community soon, but the suggestions that we've already garnered a lot of them were noted in this discussion tonight. So, you know, I'm happy to say that you know, you're not the only ones thinking about these issues of inclusion, diversity, and equity within our community. And we're hoping to really implement some concrete policy and changes within our community. So thanks everyone for your feedback. And also the Inclusion, Diversity, and Equity Advisory Board will be developing their own website as well, so you can actually track the progress that we've been undergoing.
Bill, would you say a little bit about housing justice in the town, please?
Absolutely, but I also want to acknowledge the role of some other people who are also Mike, you, Manish, part of the IDEA board, as well as Sheila Gaddis, who is my special advisor on issues of diversity and inclusion, and is also working with the IDEA board. She is a former member of the town board. Shane, I just want to say, every time I hear your presentation, I hear more and I learn more. So I really appreciate it. I would like the part, maybe you talked about it on a previous time that I didn't focus on, but that veterans apartment project in Brighton. I want to learn more about that. But yeah, I'd love to. But you know, housing, you know, land use, planning are all issues that really come together and are very important systemically, particularly in an environment where, as has been, you know, really flawlessly laid out, the base that they are being built on is one that was predicated on systemic racism. And I love Brighton. I love it to death. We're not unique, but that is a fundamental underpinning of much of the land use and other realities that we have today in Brighton. In 2018, the town most recently updated our comprehensive plan. That's something we try to do about every 10 years. And as you go through the plan, one of the things I will say, it's a somewhat different issue, but they obviously link because it's also a justice issue. That comprehensive plan was funded by a grant from the brand new state Cleaner, Greener Communities program. In fact, it was in the first comprehensive plan in the state that was funded by that plan and therefore predicated upon addressing issues of sustainability in our community, which really are also, as was pointed out earlier, public transportation, which is, don't get me started, because RTS is severely, if you think public transportation doesn't work now, wait a month. They are severely cutting back RTS service in the town of Brighton and throughout most of the suburbs, with green implications and with justice implications. But that could be another hour. I'm not going to do it. We focused on a number of areas in the town of Brighton. One of the concepts that we want to encourage, particularly in the 12 Corners area along our Monroe Avenue corridor, is to encourage mixed use and somewhat taller development. Mixed use that would involve retail or office on the first level and residential uses on higher levels in that central area. We you know, with the notion of, again, working on many levels to be a more sustainable, more walkable environment, but also an environment that provides types of housing opportunities that aren't there now. Mike, you just put the land trust in. The city, as was mentioned, there's a land trust. There have been some discussions with the county, they're ongoing, about setting up a multi-jurisdictional land trust. And that is something that I would very much like to see Brighton be a part of. And I would, support going there fully. There are a number of things that a land trust could help us with. Some of what I heard tonight. It's also a way potentially of dealing with some of the, we're lucky that we have less of this than some other communities, but some of the maintenance issues with our housing stock.
And Bill, could I give you maybe one more minute to?
Yeah, absolutely. Because you're right, I could talk forever. But I want, in terms of important reading, and I will tell you, I think God knows it's been a year of news stories, but for people interested and concerned about housing issues, and an issue that was raised is real estate steering still going on. The most important and best local news article I have read, certainly in the last year and then some, was an investigative reporting piece, which has been followed up on by Newsday newspaper, which is the primary daily newspaper on Long Island, systematically identifying racial steering by real estate agents throughout Long Island. It's the stuff you thought happened in the 50s, and at least there, it is very, very much still happening today, and they've continued with that investigative reporting. But for anybody that hasn't had a chance to read that article, compelling, just compelling as hell, and I'll shut up. But I know I won't. I do want to say, I really do appreciate all of you and the work you're doing, and we are open. We want to hear from the community where we can go. Yes, there is federal money coming in. We don't know yet because there aren't any regulations as to how that money can be used, but issues relating to justice and specifically housing justice, from my perspective, are very much on the table to the extent that those regulations will allow us to do that. Now I will shut up.
Thanks, Bill. Appreciate those reflections, and looking for anyone else who may have been quiet for a while. I know sometimes public speaking on Zoom isn't always the easiest, so if chat works for you. Anyone else have another comment, thought, action item you'd like to put forward? Janita?
Yes, we've been talking about this a little bit with Cord, but really doubling down with real estate and racial steering. I don't think people understand how pervasive it is and how much it controls neighborhoods by how people show real estate, and how, I could talk at length about my experiences, my family's experiences, but following up maybe on housing, real estate in Rochester or Monroe County, and how maybe speak to some real estate agents can speak about their experiences, maybe real estate agents of color, and some kind of teaching moment, because it's not changing.
Janita, where would you see is that something that would be organized? Would you want that through the town with the idea board? Would you maybe Cord? How would you see that happening?
I would say either Cord. I mean, I think Cord is just really, we're good at this a little bit, just like organizing, getting something accomplished. So it would be nice if maybe we could, work in collaboration with another organization. But, we essentially, we're neighbors, we're people. We know that there's amazing organizations out there doing work, and they're professional. And so we would also look to an organization that is doing some of this work to work with us.
Okay. So you'd be seeking some partners. If anyone knows partners, especially connected to real estate boards, that would be great to reach out to.
I just want to add that Brennan Thompson is the new culture responsive equity guy over at the GRAR. And he's also on our team at the Pastone Foundation. We're actually going to be doing our 3-hour teacher training for a number of the real estate agents and their board, and to help them understand this history. And they're working on digging into how the steering, because it's definitely happening in our community. But how are we going to expose that like Newsday did? Really, the state's supposed to do it, but the state hasn't been doing it and doing those tests. They used to do those tests here, but they haven't in a long time. So I'm hoping that Brennan and their committee is going to be pushing for some of those things. I'm sure Robin knows more about that too.
I'm actually a member of the Greater Rochester Association of Realtors. My profession is a real estate broker. And I know that our real estate board is sadly, just 2% African American, which is quite a bit lower than the national average of 6%. And Brennan Thompson has already made changes just in forming the Fair Housing Committee on the real estate board. And also there is now a Black caucus on the real estate board. And so if we're looking to incorporate the perspectives of real estate brokers, I certainly have a lot of resources in that regard.
Super, thanks. Christine, you put something in the chat. Could you just expand on that at all, or see where you would, who would host that, or any thoughts on that?
Sure. I apologize for my kitchen view here, multitasking this evening. So RTS has obviously contracted the transit service through Brighton and throughout the region. May 17th, we're going to see a real difference in how people are going to be able to get around, and mobility equity impacts housing choices. So I've been working with Reconnect Rochester and working directly with RTS alongside Bill on a lot of feedback about this. We need more voices behind this. If you can't get from here to there, then your housing choices are going to be different, as noted in Shane's presentation. And the system as proposed right now has really, the underpinnings are about get people to work, get people, specifically people in the center of Monroe County who are largely people of color, to work in the suburbs and back home again. Do not stop, do not visit the cultural amenities that are available to everyone else. Don't stop at shopping, don't stop at your doctor's office, don't stop anyplace else. We need to fix that so that Brighton is accessible by means other than personal vehicle. So I'd be very happy to work with anyone who's interested in puzzling through how we can encourage RTS to be to meet the needs of the community, to live up to what they say they want to be doing. And we've got some traction already with Reconnect Rochester, with Sarah Clark in the assembly, with Jeremy Cooney. Yes, and Robin notes that it's still based on the spoken wheel system of public transit, and which is insanity. 25 years ago, I was asked by RTS how to, whether or not spoke and wheel works, and I said no, and 25 years later, here we are. So
Christine, if someone wanted to connect with you on this, what would be the best way for folks to do it?
I'll put my email addresses in the chat, and I would also encourage folks to find Brighton Safe Streets for All on Facebook. So I'll put both of those in the chat. Thanks, Michael.
All right, thank you.
I've made the county executive's office aware of my very deep concern with, as I keep saying over and over, they call it Reimagine RTS. I call it nightmare. This is not a dream. This is a nightmare. And I would also note that there's a big chunk of ARPA federal money earmarked towards transit. So at a time when federal policy is clearly geared, the spoke system, one of the most important exceptions to that spoke system, a line that starts on University, goes down Winton, and then across Elmwood to the largest employer in Monroe County, the U of R Medical Center, is going to be cut to only 4 buses a day. So the spoken wheel system is only going to get worse. And once you get out past the inner ring suburbs, you have what is virtually a privatized system that really relies on rideshare. That system is going to be devastating to at so many levels to the broad community.
All right, so there was a question from Julie, and we're down to about 4 minutes, so we really want to honor people's time. Julie, for example, if somebody called up at the town and said, I'm in Brighton, I'm facing an eviction, what's available to me? Where would we send people?
When it comes to eviction, call 211. There is a county-wide system, a response to the COVID-based eviction crisis. You will be screened by one of a number of not-for-profit agencies in the community that are partnering on this project. And if you're eligible, you will have access to a payment fund. So it doesn't mean your landlord isn't going to get paid. It's a way of recognizing that COVID has impacted people. So that's pretty easy. The 211 call is real easy to remember. We just got some information today, and I know Bridget's planning on getting it up hopefully tomorrow, on foreclosure relief, which is obviously another big concern. So look to see that on our website and on our social media. That's also a regional new program.
All right, thanks. One thing I want to acknowledge, and just Mark Solomon's on the call, and Common Ground Health will be issuing in the very near future some reports on health equity in the region, which again is very closely tied to all the things we're talking about tonight. So please stay tuned for that. Bridget, I don't know if you would have a response to where tonight's video will reside, because if we want to recommend this to anyone else to watch, or we want to have anyone else engage this.
Sure. So I'm thinking it can go on the town YouTube channel or possibly our website. I'll just have to see where it would best perform.
Okay, and would we be able to send out a link to anyone who registered for tonight?
Oh, sure, absolutely. That's a great idea.
So as a follow-up, and again, if you got into this meeting somehow and you bootlegged your way in, you won't have a direct access to the link, but we'll make sure we get you one somehow. We appreciate you being here no matter how you got here. All right, we're down to last words, and so I would love to offer Shane and the Cord folks any last thoughts. There's a conversation on policing from Kristen. Yes, we will. That is one of the idea board would actually like to have a few continued conversations, one on education, one on community safety, not specific, not just about policing, but the broader idea of community safety and who keeps us safe and how. And so we've reached out to a few people. So those will be ideally some things that are coming up somewhere down the road. In terms of a series of community conversations related to inclusion, equity, diversity, and accessibility. But Shane, Susan, Ed, or Janita, anything you'd like to add before we go tonight?
Again, I think just if anybody has any, wants to get involved, you have our meadowbrookcord@gmail.com. Please reach out to us. I think this conversation on racial steering, it's been one that keeps on coming up. And Janita, I think you're right. And in terms of our next step, it's a very concrete, attainable, something that we can have a voice in. We've already begun it, actually. And just thanks for turning out, and we just have to keep the momentum going.
I think the thing I would just end with is just continue to be curious and have imagination and hope that these problems can be solved. Like, I just thinking about that, thinking of how many people didn't know this story 10 years ago about Rochester or about Meadowbrook, and how many know about it because of the actions of the Meadowbrook neighborhood, and that there is a political will behind racial justice and housing and education. Things could happen, and we have to be organized around it. We have to do our homework around it. I shared a link in the chat with a bunch of books that I've read that I strongly recommend. It's going to take hard work to understand how to dismantle these things, and we got to understand how we got here for it. So I encourage people to pick a couple books to read a couple articles, follow some people, especially people of color who are doing this racial justice work in Rochester and across our country, and start to figure out how we follow and how we do those things. And I'm seeing that happen in spaces like this, and that just leaves me with incredible hope and feel really grateful for the chance to share. So Mike, thank you for having me. And it's an honor to be sharing the screen with Ed and Janita and Susan, and really grateful for everything you all have been doing.
Ed or Janita?
Just thanks for having us. Can't wait to work more with y'all.
Same here. Thanks for having us. So excited to do this work. Let's do this. I mean, it's enough already. Enough. I'm done. I don't want to see another Black kid getting killed by the police, get a 9-year-old pepper sprayed. Done.
All right, thanks. Final thank yous. Just want to say again, thanks to those who presented tonight, Shane, Susan, Ed, and Janita. Thanks to Bridget for providing the Zoom assistance. Thanks to Rebecca Cotter through Brighton Rec. Thanks to all of you for being here. And I'm always reminded of the great, I think it's Eve Tuck wrote something, decolonization is not a metaphor. We're not talking about metaphors anymore. To Janita's point, this is reparations is not a metaphor. It needs to be in concrete action, and that's what we're trying to be about tonight. So thanks to all who are part of these concrete actions that are happening. Any ways we can augment and catalyze other actions, that's what we want to be about. If you want to follow up in any way, there's a lot of folks' emails and contacts and ideas and resources in the chat. And please hold your public officials accountable to everything we talked about tonight. Thanks, everyone. Appreciate you. Enjoy the rest of your evening, and have a good week.